Welcome to Roots and Futures. I am Dr. Jasmine Harris, Department Chair of Africana Studies at Metropolitan State University. This is a platform for amplifying local and global Black experiences. We're going to be talking about Black communities. We're going to be talking to Black people and trying to understand the connections and disconnections across the diaspora. So join us. Welcome back, everyone, to Roots and Futures. I am your co-host, Dr. Jasmine Harris, and
I am Dr. Pius Kamau. I'm the second co-host.
And today we're going to be talking about traveling to the continent of Africa. And Pius has a quote for us.
I have a quote which unfortunately is not very complimentary of Africa, but here it is. This is our Washington Post columnist who spent 3 years in Africa, in Somalia, Rwanda, Kenya, and that part of Africa. And he wrote a book, and it's called Out of America, in comparison to the Out of Africa that Blixen wrote. But anyway, one of the things that Keith Richburg said was, quote, "Thank God my nameless ancestor, brought across the ocean in chains and leg irons, made it out alive. Thank God I'm an American," close quote. And that, I think, is an interesting point to begin. Somewhere to start. What do you think?
That's not what I thought you were going to read. That quote went left very fast. Before I say my thoughts about it, we forgot to introduce our guest today, one of our students, Cyrus Holt. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Did that quote feel crazy to you?
It did.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't the only one, because I'm sure everyone saw my eyes get big at the end of that.
And that's the reason. That's the reason I thought that's an apt place to sort of begin. And I, as someone who was born and raised in Africa, and who regards himself as an original African, I mean, I have my own opinions about that. But since you folks are Americans, born in America, maybe you might have something to say about that, about what Keith Richburg had to say.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably contextual that I had that sort of shocking response to the quote, because in 2026, that feels like a taboo thing to say. Mm-hmm. But when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, there was clearly a sense among African Americans that we preferred to be American, and that we had been socialized just like everyone else in the United States and in most of Western Europe to think of Africa as this collection of third world countries that were all full of starving children, where disease runs rampant, where the streets are unclean. And part of that socialization process is to get everyone in the United States to think of American chattel slavery as, in some ways, a necessary evil to rescue these poor, almost animalistic people from this destitute place. When in reality, one, the continent of Africa is bigger than the, entire European Union. Right. But on maps, it's sort of drawn as comparable in size. And it's also so diverse in its people, in its cultures, in its cities, in the minerals that can be, extracted from the ground, which is another problem, in the wildlife, in the flora and fauna. But that's not how we have been taught to think about it. And, I'll be frank, one of the reasons that we're having this conversation today is that I just came back from
Right.
12 days in Rwanda and Uganda, and Cyrus and a handful of other students spent about 12 days there, 2 weeks in January. And, I'll be frank and say that as I was preparing for this trip, it's my first time on the continent of Africa. I was not concerned, but unsure about what lied ahead of me in terms of an experience. I had some sense because my students had already come back and they had a great time and they had nothing but positive things to say. So it wasn't fear, but it was certainly uncertainty. And since I've returned, every time I interact with a Black American person and they hear that I've just returned from Rwanda and Uganda, all they have are questions. And I think that that's a reflection of the sort of dissonance between how we've been socialized to think about the continent of Africa and what it's actually like.
Well, you went to Africa.
I also just got back like 2 months ago, right? But I think, like Dr. Harris, going in, you have some like preconceived notions, right, about like what you're going to expect. But then coming back, they're kind of broken down. But then you also have new ones about like how Americans view, right? And I think based on the quote that you shared, that was after his experience on the continent, correct? He made this statement, which to me is kind of weird. I feel like it would be the other way around. Like he would make it before he goes to the continent. Like, I'm so proud to be an American, but then he visits Africa and then he's like, okay, but I'm also an African American, which is a whole nother,
Yeah,
layer.
yeah. Maybe you can concretize your experience. So what it is that you came away feeling, and you too. I mean, sort of in concrete terms, what was it that you felt? And then of course, then we can talk a bit about Mr. Richburg, and why he said those things. I think because you have to kind of fill in the story a little bit, because there were reasons why he said that, and we can spend a small amount of time and discuss those issues. Yeah. So in concrete, what did you feel? What do you think?
Okay, before I get into that,
Sure.
I might say something controversial.
No, we're
And
here to deal with all that.
I think it's not wrong to agree with Mr. Richburg. I think, you know, and yes, we're missing the important pieces of context, right?
Right.
The stuff that happened, the reason he said what he said. But I don't think it's crazy to disagree with him. I think what he said is, kind of like, thank God I'm American. Yeah, thank God I'm American.
Yeah.
But emotions that I felt, it was very like, I'm trying to think of an emotion now, but like kind, like, and I don't think it was just because I was American that people were so, open and kind to hearing me talk. And kind's not an emotion. I know that, but I'm trying to think of an emotion that goes with kind, you know?
It felt very calming
Calming.
in a way, right? Even though I don't know about y'all, but we were doing like 12-hour days and I'm just a little bit too old for that. So it wasn't calm in that way, but it was calm in the same feeling that I have the one time that I've been to Jamaica, where everyone around me is a person of color and I don't have to feel the same sort of imminent threat feeling that I do when I'm in the United States, when I'm in Europe, right? And I think it's interesting, Sai, that you say, that maybe it's controversial to say that quote's okay. And it's not that it's not okay, because, I think the same thing. I've been to 6 of the 7 continents. I don't think I'm getting to Antarctica. But every time I'm on another continent, even though the streets are cleaner and the food is better
Mhm.
and cheaper most cases, I still, get to a point where I'm like, I would like to go back to America now. And I think that is just a reflection of being socialized to have the world run a particular way, right?
Absolutely.
And what I found so interesting about Rwanda and Uganda, but Rwanda in particular, Kigali, the capital city, for those of you who don't know, is that daily life felt so similar to American
Mm.
life. And I think that was the sort of calming piece of it. It's like, oh, it doesn't have to be villages and dirt roads and, tribal communities in order for me to feel like I'm getting the African experience, because that's only one piece of Africa. That's the piece that we're socialized to think is all of Africa. But they have bustling cities and taxis and buses and, sidewalks just like everyone else.
And the other thing that I think you're finding or you're seeing when you're there, you you're among people who don't wish you any harm,
Exactly.
you know. Um, and I think this man was visiting places like
Hmm.
Somalia, where people were actually killing each other when he was there. People were shooting at each other, etc. And he had to hide, in addition to the other people too. And then, of course, unfortunately, he was in Rwanda at the same time when they had the genocide.
Oh.
So, so if you witness a genocide happening in front of your eyes, and you're looking at bodies sort of going down the river, in massive numbers, you can you you're shocked.
Sure.
I mean, this shocks you to the core of your mind, your existence. And I think at the end of it all, I think it sort of came back with that feeling that, boy, I'm glad I'm going home
Yeah.
to America.
Yeah.
Um, so I think there are two ways of looking at the same picture. So the genocide happened. It happened in Rwanda. But guess what? A genocide happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma, too.
Exactly. That's just what I was about to say.
And a genocide, occurred in Delaware, among other people. I mean, the number of genocides that have happened in the 1800s, like all across America.
I mean, a lot of folks make the argument that American chattel slavery is a form of genocide. It wiped out,
It is.
an entire population of people.
I think it is. I mean, what we did to them, to the American Indian, the
That as
American,
well.
the American Native, was a form of genocide. And the lynching of people, one after another, after another, after another. I don't know how you can be happy about that.
Well, and I think it's interesting that this writer, Richburg, had this to say after experiencing the genocide in Rwanda and in another country. Did you say?
In Somalia.
In Somalia.
Well, Somalia. And of Sudan, of course.
Is that sort of presupposes that man doesn't feel that sort of imminent threat feeling that I was talking about, right? But that's unusual, I think. I think that most Black Americans, most Native Americans would say that there is a sort of overarching fear of white people, full stop. And I don't mean that to sound controversial, but it is to say that, like, everywhere I go, I have to be mindful of who I'm talking to and what, sort of context clues they're providing before I say I'm a professor of Africana studies,
Yeah.
right? Especially because my PhD is in sociology, and often when I'm in conversations with white people and they ask me what I do, I'll just say I'm a sociologist, unless they've already sort of clearly marked themselves as interested in allyship, right? If I got pulled over the other day, because
Please.
by the police because I still have Texas plates on my car. It's like a whole thing. But and it was nothing. I didn't get a ticket. He was just like, you got to get, new plates. But my hands are shaking, right? As he's coming over to the car. As the lights go on, I'm like, what the hell did I do? A second police car pulls up as he has my driver's license and is, running it in his car. And I immediately am like, oh my goodness, should I go live on social media? Like, are they about to kill me? You know what I mean? And that's a reflection of this sort of long-standing degradation of Black people at the hands of white people in this country that makes me feel constantly on edge. But when I was in Africa, I didn't have that same sense of fear of the people around me, and it was much easier to be a part of
Did
the
you have a
community.
sense of belonging then?
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Interesting.
one of the things that I think is most interesting, and I'd love to hear, what y'all think about this, is that I felt a sense of belonging and a sense of connection, not to the land, but to the people in a way that now I've never traveled to West Africa, but I have met, a number of West Africans here in the United States, first generation West Africans. And I never feel that same sense of camaraderie or community. It's like looking at someone and you can say, yes, we have the same skin color, but we don't have the same culture. But when I was in Rwanda and Uganda, I felt like that culture was much closer to the sort of descendants of American chattel slavery in, the American South that I am related to compared to having interacted with folks in the West. And that makes me think of this narrative that we've created about the transatlantic slave trade, which is because we know that the ships picked up people on the shores of West Africa and then went to North America, South America, Caribbean. We talk about descendants of American chattel slavery as being definitively West African, when in reality there was a lot of
Over the Congo.
movement, right? Yes, around the Congo, around Rwanda, Uganda, Kenya, right? And so it's just as likely that many of us are actually not from that immediate West African coast area, but are more a reflection of folks across the central portion of the continent right there.
Central Africa.
Right. Yeah. Which was not something that I was expecting to be thinking about when I got there, but I felt such a familiarity in the structure of the community, in the way that they talked to people, the way that they interacted, that it really got me thinking, like, this feels more closely aligned with my American descendants than I've been led to believe.
That's interesting, isn't it? I mean, that a continental or a racial imprint sort of stays with us, even 300 after the fact, maybe.
Exactly.
You know.
Yeah.
Now there are there's some Black communities in the south of this country. They're still I mean they somehow were not immersed in slavery, and they got away. I mean they got away. I don't know their name now, but they behave almost like the people back in West Africa.
Oh, you mean because they developed like African
Well, they
communities,
continue the African customs,
traditions? Yeah.
etc., etc. Yeah.
Like Africa Town, which is in Alabama.
Yeah, there's a place like that, and Also, it's true of Brazil, for example,
Hmm.
where some Africans escaped and so resisted the slavery,
Mhm.
you know, and their behavior and their customs continue to be the same as was in among the Yorubas and what have you.
Right,
Yeah,
right. And then the Gullah Geechee area in South Carolina.
that's what I was thinking about.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But also, because the first wave of enslaved people that were coming over on the boats were likely this mix of tribes, mix of regions. They had different things, different seeds, different rices,
Mhm.
different hairstyles, different languages, right? In some of the narratives that we have about the first groups of people, they talk about being in the ships and not being able to communicate with one another because their tribes all spoke different languages. And so a lot of what is the Black American community in the United States today that are descended from those who were enslaved in the South in the United States really have this sort of mix of different sort of cultures and pieces of tribal communities in Africa that they sort of blended together over the generations to create something new and different. And I think that for whatever reason, Rwanda and Uganda, perhaps because of the movement, pre and post genocide,
Mhm.
feels more like that sort of amalgamation than like Nigerian culture, for example, which is very clear cut, and very sort of particular to that region.
You mean the tribal customs, for example,
Yes.
in Nigeria,
Hmm.
as opposed to what? As opposed to where?
As opposed to Rwanda and Uganda, where it felt more like a mix of
Interesting.
a bunch of different cultures, and even the language, when we were traveling across the countries, our guide was Ugandan,
Mm.
Kenani, and he would explain to us the like small change in language for like thank you, for example. And he would explain that the feminine versus masculine version of the word changes the same way in the language that they speak in Rwanda versus the language that they speak in Uganda. And it felt like there was a lot of sort of crossover. And I wonder if that's because, as all of the political and social strife between the Tutsi and the Hutus were happening long before the genocide in 94, 94, folks are coming back and forth to all of the surrounding countries, trying to see if they could stay in their home, having to, sort of being driven out by violence, coming back in. And I wonder if that sort of constant movement around the region created this more
Homo some homogenization of at least of language.
right,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
right. And customs, I think, as well, in some ways. Sai, you remind me, you have a parent that's from the continent. So how did you sort of feel about all this?
So my mom's from Namibia, which is
Oh, really?
Southwest Africa,
Southwest, yeah.
right? And in America, like I'm viewed as just black, right, before anything. But then when I clarify that I'm Namibian, so African from the continent, a lot of people don't know what Namibia is. In Rwanda, it was funny because off appearance, I don't appear black
Mm.
necessarily over there, right? But when I clarify that I'm Namibian, they know where Namibia is, and they know things about Namibia like that Americans don't. So it was a funny like sort of flip reverse of like identity to me, right? And I think you were speaking about the transatlantic slave trade and like how early on it was a culmination of different peoples, different ethnicities, right? And language was a barrier, right? Communication was difficult.
Right.
And you also spoke about how being in Rwanda and Uganda to you felt, you know, I forget the word you used, but it was calm, right? And it felt sort of like home because it was this culmination of mixes and everything, right? But did you also feel like, because for me, I know I felt like in certain spaces I felt like an American, right? Which is like outsider, not part, right? So did you ever have that feeling of like, okay, yeah, let me take a step back. I'm I'm not like I'm not a part of this community or this culture, right? But I'm still here looking from the outside in, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, clearly marked as Americans, and you were with a bunch of Black students and Black professors and stuff, but I was with some administrators that were white, and so it was much harder to sort of blend into the community, although several times, especially when we were in Uganda, folks just assumed that I was like a Rwandan or a Ugandan part of the group as opposed to one of the, Americans. When we were shopping, of course, right? Because we're trying to use different money and, and immediately when they recognize that you're Americans, then the interaction is different, right?
They charge you more too.
Right, right, yeah. Well, there's more haggling that needs to be done for sure. But for me, the thing that you're talking about, where it's like, whoa, this is not my community, was really the bathrooms in Uganda. Um, in many places in Uganda for women, although I came to understand that this was not true for the men's stalls, which I didn't understand. But there wasn't like a toilet. There was just a hole in the ground and places to put your feet. And that was very shocking. And as an American, was difficult to navigate and upsetting. So when you're like, I really have to go to the bathroom, and then you get there and you're like, oh, all right, I've got to figure this out, right? And I got into this sort of back and forth with our guide Kinani because I was complaining about it as we were, heading back to Rwanda. I was just like, oh, I really just want to use a regular bathroom. And we had walked by the men's room and the door was open and you could see that there were toilets in there. And I was like, now I'm really upset. I don't understand. I want to go and use the men's bathroom. And so Kanani, right, a Ugandan, he's like, no, like, this is the healthiest way to use the bathroom. It's the best way for your body. It's like every like young old person that you see in Uganda, like this is what they do. And I was like, okay, but I have never had been asked to do this before. And I've traveled to lots of countries, just not any that have this sort of sewer system. And we were sort of going back and forth, and it took him a while. Literally the next day we were at lunch and it came up again. And he was like, yeah, at first I didn't understand what you were like so upset about, right? Because this is the way that we do it. And then I was thinking about it later and I was like, I guess if your body's never had to sit that way or like squat that way, if your quads and your hamstrings are not strong enough, if you've never experienced that before, it might be hard to do, right? And so it was a very interesting um, interaction where both of us had to sort of check our
Yeah.
cultural assumptions and then come to meet in the middle where we still didn't agree about
Yeah.
like the best way to do it. But we came to understand that we had these different perspectives because of the way that we had grown up. But yeah, that was the one time when I was like, this is not my community. And I did feel like the writer in the quote, and I was like, I would like to go back to America. Thank God.
Well, back to my own bathroom.
Exactly. Or where I know all the bathrooms will be the same.
I think to your point too about like the cultures, different cultures and colliding and clashing and also meshing, right? for my experience, it was unique because we had Dr. Mpandi, who works in the department, right? And he's from Zimbabwe.
Right.
And then we also had another student who was from Uganda, and we had another student who has family from Togo, right? So we had Black Americans, and then we had Americans who have African identity, and then an actual African who came to America, right? And it was interesting to see how all those sort of interactions, happened. Like it was interesting to see how the student who was from Uganda was able to like connect with both like Kanani and then I don't know if you were able to meet Moses, but
Yeah, we met
okay,
Moses.
yeah, and Moses, they're like cousins, like long lost cousins,
Yeah.
right? And then Dr. Mpandi and the two hosts, like you said with the language, it was the same language but different, like the same words but different languages,
Yeah.
right? So Mpandi would understand stuff just because he knows the word in his own language, right? And then same thing with the student who had family from Togo, like he would recognize food based on how it was like prepared, and he's like, wait, but we have this in my culture, but it's just like
A little
it's the
different.
same food but different, preparation. So just interesting to see how all these like cultures on the continent exist in different regions, but then also like expand from the same, like the outward expansion or
Well,
growth.
also how you can see that stuff reflected in Black American
Right.
culture, right? Like the food was something that I was very surprised tasted very familiar to me, and looked very familiar, and the service of it, and this idea of doing it, buffet style, that's a very
Using your hand.
using your using your hand, although we didn't really use our hands
Okay.
much in Rwanda, more in Uganda, I would say, in terms of food. But just, that there are greens and there are potatoes and there's meat in like a sauce, like I mean, I suppose every culture has some variation of that, but the way that the flavors were stacked on top of each other, the way that the food was served, it just reminded me a lot of going to my grandmother's house on a Sunday afternoon and like all the things that would be served. And like, speaking of thinking of, Kanani and Moses as sort of long lost cousins, I think that that's why at the end of the trip we were sort of bickering like that, because we had spent so much of the trip sort of talking about our families and our communities and what was similar and what was different in our mothers, because he was constantly like telling me to get more food, and they eat a lot very often. In Rwanda, it's like, where Americans are like, we're only supposed to eat a little bit, every couple of hours. They eat big meals like 3 times a day into the late evening.
Yeah.
Dinner is late, like around 10.
Yeah.
And our host would often say to me, like, you didn't put enough on your plate. And I'm like, no, I can't. I'm from a family where if you put it on your plate, you have to eat it. And I'm full. I'm full. We just ate like 3 hours ago. I'm going to have some because I don't want to be rude. And now we're at a new place and a new person is offering us food. But I want you to know that I'm really not hungry. So I'm only going to take this. And he immediately was like, oh, my mother would say the same thing, but I would eat everything anyway, so it was not ever a problem. And so it was that sense of connection that I've not felt in interacting with West Africans generally.
And then I think what we have to say too is that each one of us who goes to the continent will come back with a different impression. Clearly, it reminds me of the five blind women describing an elephant. I mean, oh yes, there's a trunk, or there's a tail, the ears,
Right.
but then maybe then I should qualify that too by saying that maybe he who or she who goes there very often ends up with a more refined impression of what Africa truly is.
Right.
Or maybe one more question: is Africa truly is? I mean, is there one Africa or are there many Africas?
I mean, I think what I'm coming to understand is that there are many Africas, right? Again, Americans are socialized not to think of Africa as this diverse place, right? I even would catch myself when I talk about it. It's like I want to say I went to Rwanda and Uganda as opposed to Africa, right? Because that could be any number of places across a vast geographic landscape. And because now I understand that there is so much diversity, I want to be, because like we don't really say, you say like I went to Paris or I went to London, right? You don't
You say I went
say
to Europe.
right, exactly. Or like I went to the United Kingdom, or you talk about the individual country, but we don't do that with Africa because we think of it as just this one big destitute place. And I think going there makes you realize that there are many versions of Africa, and we should think of it the same way that we think of South America, right? When we go to visit Brazil, we don't say I went to South America, I went to Brazil, I went to Argentina, I went to Chile, right? And we need to start giving the countries in Africa that same respect and talking about them as the individual entities that they are.
Yeah, and so have you been to Namibia by any chance?
I have. I was
You have? You have?
like 10, 9,
Uh,
9, 10. So
Do you remember
pretty young.
much of it at all?
Kind of. I
What do you
remember.
remember?
I remember my mom's childhood home in Windhoek. We went to Swakopmund because I have an uncle who lives there, and then we also spent a few nights in the desert for like a family reunion.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what I remember from that is all the men would like go out and kill the goat or whatever,
Oh
the
yeah.
animal for dinner,
Uh-huh.
and then they would just throw it on the grill in front of everyone. It was a pretty fun experience. But I was like I said, like a kid. So
Maybe you should go back, eh?
I definitely that's my plan. I want to graduate and then spend like a year
Yeah.
just traveling. So
That's been the best thing about this experience that the students were able to have, and hopefully that we'll be able to offer to other students, which is why I went there, to see if we can start the study abroad program, is how many of you are trying to get back there. And I kept bringing it up when we were on the trip, and people thought I was joking. And I'm like, I'm really not. They're like, they are making plans to come back. And I think that says something really special about the different countries on the continent and the continent itself, that when Black people go there, they often, though not always, as we've learned from this quote, feel a desire to learn more and to come back and to see more of the continent. I certainly felt that way.
Yeah, and but so to kind of to prove that and to reinforce your statement is the fact that more and more Americans, Black Americans, are in fact, relocating themselves, to Africa. Um, and many of the African countries, especially on the West Coast, welcoming Black Americans. Now that said, I'm a true believer of the fact that this home America was built by black backs, black blood and sweat, and this belongs to you, as much as it belongs to the American natives, as well as opposed to the white people. So we cannot sort of give the white government, white establishment a pass, by relocating to Africa because things are gonna be better. We have to make things better here.
Right.
and go to Africa because it's a good place to go to.
Right.
And yeah, you can be a citizen of both continents,
Right.
and I see no reason why not.
Well, and the same argument that was being made by civil rights leaders in the 60s when folks were trying to encourage people to go to Liberia, right? And it's this, you could do that, but also we have worked hard to establish a culture and a community in this country that we have a right to as well. And I would say you just, to go back to the quote and, this idea of wanting to get back to America. I enjoyed myself so much when I was in Rwanda and Uganda, and I'm lucky that I don't have to call it a once in a lifetime opportunity because I will be back in less than 12 months with some students and, hopefully many times in the next decade, as we get the study abroad program really working. But I would be remiss if I didn't say that I feel a special connection to the United States and to the role that Black Americans have played in the development of American music culture, sports culture, arts culture, and I see the tendrils of that in our sort of historical connections to Africa. But what my ancestors did over the next 300 years was take that and shape it into something new and special, where we are only 13% of the population in the United States, and yet we dominate the culture in terms of defining what's cool and what's not. And that's not a position, despite the amount of degradation that we experience to sort of knock us off of that position, that I'm willing to give up lightly. And so while I think it's a privilege to be able to go back, to this continent in some ways, thinking about it generationally, I also am committed to making things better for Black people here because, to your point, we had, as a very small percentage of the population, a very important and large impact on the development of this culture. And, we shouldn't have to give it up.
I agree with you as we end this section, this session. I think that Black Americans have so much talent, that can be used to bring up a lot of people in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's almost like a going back home to improve the home where you once were.
Right.
And I think that's one way of looking at it, as opposed to the way that Keith Richburg thought of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I hate it. I want to get out of here. I want to
Mm-hmm.
go back to my America.
home, right.
But I mean, going back to Africa and doing some good.
Right.
I mean, so that there are no more genocides.
Right.
So that there's more wealth and more education, better health.
Yeah.
That's something that Black America can do.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
And, programs like our Study Abroad program will helpfully do that. We're talking about doing faculty exchanges so our professors can go there and help support the higher education system. I definitely think there is an opportunity to create this bridge between Black America and many of the countries on the continent. And we're going to start with Rwanda and Uganda.
Fantastic. Great. Wonderful.
Well, thank you all. That is the end of another episode, and we will see you soon.